Imagine a world where gravity didn't just hold you down, it crushed you. Overnight, the invisible force you've always taken for granted doubled. Your body, your house, the cars you drive, even the air around you, everything suddenly weighed twice as much. You try to lift your coffee cup, and it feels like a brick. You step outside, and each movement is a Herculean effort. Running is impossible, even standing upright is a battle against the relentless pull of Earth's new weight. Scientists call it a hypothetical, but let's take it seriously. What if it actually happened? The first signs would be chaos. Buildings not designed for this load would collapse, bridges would snap under pressure, and elevators would become death traps. People across the globe would be trapped in their homes, struggling to navigate streets that are suddenly hostile. Airports would shut down because planes couldn't generate enough lift, and the entire transport infrastructure would collapse. This isn't a slow apocalypse, it's instant, brutal, and completely unforgiving. Hospitals would overflow with injuries caused not by accidents but by the very force holding us to the ground. Bones would shatter under stress they were never built to handle. Humanity, as we know it, would be tested to its breaking point. In the military, this new gravity would be a nightmare. Tanks that used to roar across fields would barely move, soldiers would find their gear twice as heavy, their rifles nearly useless in prolonged combat. The notion of war as we know it would change overnight. Armies would struggle to march, the physical strain would be lethal. Air forces would be grounded permanently. Naval vessels would sink faster due to increased weight and water pressure dynamics. Even elite special forces, trained to endure extreme conditions, would be reduced to crawling like insects. History's greatest warriors would be humbled, not by enemies, but by physics itself. Law enforcement would face a similar reality. Pursuits on foot would become impossible. Prisons, suddenly unprepared for this new strain, might collapse, releasing those who are suddenly as helpless as everyone else. The tough guy image of police officers vanishes when every step feels like carrying a mountain. Riot control would fail catastrophically, not due to rebellion but due to sheer gravitational oppression. Even tasers and firearms, when handled under doubled gravity, would be awkward, unwieldy, and ineffective in emergencies. Order would crumble, not because of crime, but because humanity itself cannot physically cope. Religions and ideologies would face an existential test. People might interpret this event as divine wrath, the end times, or a punishment for humanity's hubris. Temples, mosques, churches, structures not built for this sudden burden, would crumble. Yet some sects might argue that this is a cleansing force, a radical opportunity to rethink our purpose. Prayer would feel different when your body strains under an unbearable weight, and every act of devotion becomes a physical ordeal. Faith could either deepen as people cling to hope or collapse entirely under the sheer brutality of reality. But what about everyday life? Forget jogging, dancing, or even walking briskly. Grocery shopping turns into a weightlifting challenge, staircases are no longer optional, they're deadly. Furniture collapses under its own weight. Cars would struggle to start, tires flattening faster under increased pressure. Even the air feels heavier. Breathing becomes slightly harder because your lungs must work against the doubled force pulling everything down. It's not science fiction, it's a horrifyingly logical consequence of a single variable changing. And here's the cruel truth, this isn't something you can adapt to overnight. Evolution operates over millennia, not days. In schools, children would face a nightmare scenario. Chairs and desks would collapse under students' weight. Playground swings would snap, slides would bend. Physical education becomes impossible, and simple mobility is a danger. Universities would shut down labs because equipment cannot function under doubled gravitational stress. Mental health would suffer as humans realize the body they depend on is suddenly inadequate. Panic would spread faster than the virus ever could, because fear isn't contagious, it's physical, and now it's crushing. Imagine a world where every step is a negotiation with physics, where survival depends not on cunning or strength but on endurance and luck. This is the reality of Earth with double gravity. And here's the kicker, while scientists speculate about Mars and Jupiter, we never imagined Earth itself could turn against us. But now that it has, there's no turning back. Life as we knew it, simple, mobile, free, is gone. Every aspect of civilization is now a calculation of weight, stress, and torque. Humanity is forced into an unprecedented adaptation test. If you think this sounds terrifying, you're not wrong. But we haven't even scratched the surface. If you're fascinated and terrified, hit subscribe now, because we will change how you think about your body, your city, and the fragile systems holding your life together. As the dust settles from the initial chaos, the second shockwave hits humanity. Our industries and energy systems simply cannot cope with doubled gravity. Factories are designed with materials, machinery, and workers built for one Earth weight, not two. Conveyor belts buckle, cranes collapse, and power plants groan under the new strain. The machinery that churned out our food, cars, and electronics now becomes a liability. Imagine a steel mill suddenly unable to lift its own presses. Workers, already exhausted from moving under crushing force, cannot maintain operations. Production halts, and supply chains crumble. The economy isn't just slowing, it's collapsing into an unrecognizable heap. Transportation, the lifeline of modern civilization, becomes a nightmare. Planes can't take off because lift is halved while weight doubles. Cars burn more fuel just to move, yet struggle to accelerate. Trains buckle on tracks that weren't engineered for this sudden increase in weight. Shipping containers crush ports, and pipelines sag or burst under their own mass. Even bicycles and scooters, once symbols of freedom, become almost impossible to use. Cities turn into static traps. People can't commute, deliveries fail, and the most basic goods vanish from stores. Humanity is immobilized not by enemies or politics but by the unyielding force of physics. Energy systems face the same brutal logic. Wind turbines, solar panels, and hydroelectric systems are engineered for a predictable gravitational environment. Turbines might snap under heavier winds because of increased inertia, solar panels could collapse under the extra load of dust and debris, dams risk structural failure from subtle increases in water weight and pressure. Nuclear plants, already complex, become ticking time bombs as cranes and maintenance machinery fail. Cities face blackouts, heating failures, and energy scarcity. The very networks that kept civilization humming are now paralyzed, leaving millions in darkness and cold. Humanity's dependence on engineered systems proves its greatest vulnerability. Agriculture suffers a similar fate. Crops are suddenly less able to support themselves, the stems snap, roots fail under heavier soil, and fruit literally collapses to the ground. Harvesting machines cannot function under doubled weight. Food shortages become inevitable. Livestock struggle to move, feed, and reproduce, reducing supply further. The supermarkets that still have goods run out within days, and prices skyrocket in a surreal economic inflation. Panic buying gives way to desperation as entire communities confront starvation. Cities built for abundance now experience scarcity unprecedented in human history. And then there's the global economy. Stock markets crash, not because of policy or fear, but because nothing works physically. Warehouses collapse, delivery networks fail, and production lines seize. The value of money becomes meaningless when a loaf of bread weighs double and costs twice as much effort to obtain. Banks and financial institutions, abstract as they are, cannot compensate for a world where the fundamental laws of physics have changed. The market crashes into irrelevance. Wealth is measured no longer in dollars but in one's ability to physically survive, move, and adapt. The old hierarchies dissolve, replaced by sheer physical endurance. Even technology, humanity's pride, is compromised. Smartphones and gadgets survive the weight, but batteries drain faster due to overworked charging infrastructure. Servers overheat and collapse as cooling systems fail under mechanical stress. Internet networks falter, cutting off communication just when coordination is most critical. Humanity's digital world, built on fragile systems optimized for a lighter Earth, becomes a ghost town. Knowledge survives only on resilient minds, not in the infrastructure designed to support it. In a doubled gravity world, intelligence alone cannot replace the brutal demand of physics. The psychological toll is staggering. Humans are not built for constant strain. Every movement is exhausting. Sleep becomes fragmented as muscles cramp under constant load. Anxiety and fear spike, not because of abstract threats but because the body itself has become an obstacle. Depression spreads as people confront the stark reality: survival is no longer guaranteed by intelligence, skill, or ingenuity, it is dictated by raw physical endurance. The strongest minds may fail if their bodies collapse under stress. Humanity is forced to confront its mortality in ways never imagined. And yet, some adapt. Communities form around the most resilient individuals, developing new techniques for movement, construction, and agriculture. Society fractures into microcultures of survival specialists. Old professions vanish, new ones emerge overnight. Weight engineers, mobility coaches, structural recalibrators become the elite. Those who cannot adapt are left behind, victims of a merciless reality. The struggle is not metaphorical, it is literal. Gravity does not negotiate. Human civilization teeters between adaptation and extinction. Will we collapse entirely under this force, or will ingenuity and human will allow us to claw back some semblance of life? You will not believe the brutal limits we face, and the radical changes our biology demands. Now let's talk about the body, your body, the very machine that makes you human. Double the gravity, and suddenly every heartbeat, every breath, every blink is an act of resistance. Muscles strain as if lifting weights permanently, bones feel like brittle scaffolding under unrelenting pressure. Even standing upright becomes an extreme sport. The average adult, who once walked effortlessly, now feels like Atlas carrying the world, not metaphorically, but literally. Your legs buckle, your back screams, and simple motion is a negotiation with survival. Cardiovascular systems, never designed for this load, struggle to pump blood to the brain. Fainting and strokes become everyday risks. Bones, long thought to be resilient, are vulnerable. Fractures skyrocket as skeletal structures fail under stress they were never meant to endure. Osteoporosis, a disease of the elderly, becomes a crisis for all ages. Even youth, whose bones are strongest, suffer microfractures in seconds of movement. Joints, ligaments, and tendons are shredded by repeated stress. Humanity's fundamental architecture, the skeleton, reveals an unforgiving truth: we are not built for a world twice as heavy. The most athletic individuals collapse first, victims of the very strength they once relied on. But muscles are not spared. The simple act of lifting a child, opening a door, or climbing stairs becomes a test of extreme strength. Cardiac strain skyrockets as the heart pumps harder to maintain blood flow. Athletes trained for endurance crumble within hours, ordinary citizens cannot walk a single city block without exhaustion. The human body is now the battlefield, and even rest provides only a temporary reprieve. Death is no longer dramatic, it is mundane, happening quietly as strain overwhelms vital systems. Neurology is hit in unexpected ways. The brain, starved of consistent blood flow, experiences confusion, memory lapses, and panic attacks. Cognitive function degrades under chronic physical stress. Decisions slow, reflexes fail, and even basic communication becomes difficult. In this reality, intelligence cannot compensate for physical limitation, the mind is tethered to the failing body. People lose coordination, forget essential tasks, and social cohesion frays as survival dominates thought. The most brilliant thinkers are humbled by raw physics. Children face catastrophic consequences. Growth plates in bones cannot handle doubled stress, development slows, deforms, or stops. Schools, already struggling, become physically dangerous zones. Playgrounds, sports, and even classrooms are lethal under the new weight. Childhood itself becomes a fight for basic mobility. Adolescents must train from infancy for survival, or risk deformity and injury. Humanity's future hinges not on technology, but on whether the next generation can endure where adults fail. Pregnancy and childbirth are transformed into life-or-death scenarios. Uterine muscles and skeletal support struggle under extra force. Complications rise exponentially. Mortality spikes for both mothers and infants, creating a generational crisis. Humanity's ability to reproduce is now physically constrained, threatening long-term survival. Doubling gravity doesn't just crush bones, it threatens the continuity of life itself. Social dynamics fracture. Communities divide along physical capability. The strong dominate, the weak are marginalized, sometimes fatally. Traditional hierarchies, wealth, knowledge, influence, become meaningless. Only physical endurance dictates power. Leaders must be able to move, fight, and survive where everyone else collapses. Society becomes Darwinian in the most literal sense. Families split as the able-bodied prioritize survival, leaving the physically vulnerable behind. Ethics, compassion, and morality are challenged by survival imperatives. Yet, in this crucible, adaptation emerges. Humans are creative, stubborn, and relentlessly resourceful. Exoskeletons, harnesses, and mechanical aids appear rapidly. Communities develop new ways to move, eat, and survive. Sports become irrelevant, movement itself is now an achievement. Every step, every breath, is celebrated. Humanity becomes a species defined not by comfort, but by the ability to endure what was once unimaginable. In a way, doubling gravity doesn't just challenge us, it forces evolution to accelerate. If you thought this part was intense, the next part will explore how institutions, governments, militaries, and law enforcement, collapse or mutate in the face of a doubled-weight Earth. Imagine armies immobilized, police powerless, and governments struggling to enforce rules when every citizen is physically impaired. The very foundations of society will be tested like never before. Subscribe now if you want to see the shocking consequences for authority, order, and global politics in a world where gravity rules absolutely. Governments, militaries, and law enforcement, the pillars of civilization, face annihilation under double gravity. Soldiers, trained for endurance and combat, are suddenly as helpless as ordinary civilians. Tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery become immobile weights rather than instruments of power. Even the mightiest militaries, armed with nukes and drones, are rendered impotent because moving humans and machines is suddenly a Herculean challenge. Air forces are grounded permanently, jets cannot lift off. Naval fleets are crippled as heavier vessels struggle with buoyancy and propulsion. The concept of national defense collapses not due to enemies, but because physics doesn't negotiate. Law enforcement, meant to uphold order, faces a similar fate. Foot chases become impossible, riots, far from being quelled, spread simply because officers cannot pursue or control crowds. SWAT teams, armed with specialized equipment, are slowed to a crawl under the new reality. Police stations themselves become death traps, as heavy ceilings, doors, and infrastructure fail under stress. Crime spikes not because morality fails, but because people can no longer move efficiently, creating chaos born of physics, not malice. Humanity realizes, horrifyingly, that control was always an illusion, structure relies on mobility, and mobility is now limited. Politics becomes theater under the weight of gravity. Leaders are forced to operate in environments they cannot physically endure. Cabinets are paralyzed, parliaments collapse as buildings buckle under stress. Even the act of traveling to meet constituents is a logistical nightmare. Elections, legislative sessions, and governance grind to a halt. Decisions cannot be enforced when everyone, from generals to bureaucrats, is physically compromised. The very idea of authority becomes absurd. Leaders are judged not by intelligence or charisma, but by how long they can stand without collapsing. Power becomes synonymous with physical endurance, radically reshaping social hierarchy. Religion, ideology, and belief systems are also tested in brutal ways. Temples, mosques, and churches, built for one gravity, are stressed to the breaking point. Rituals that once required kneeling, walking, or lifting become dangerous. Priests, imams, and monks are no longer able to guide their congregations in traditional ways. Faith is physically taxing, devotion becomes literal labor. Some religious groups interpret the doubled gravity as divine judgment, a cleansing of the unworthy. Others collapse under practical impossibility, as congregations cannot gather safely. Theology meets the unyielding, scientific law of physics, and the consequences are merciless. The economy, already crippled by infrastructure collapse, faces an even more radical recalibration. Factories fail, transportation is paralyzed, and energy networks falter. Governments cannot stabilize markets when moving goods, people, or even basic currency becomes almost impossible. Black markets, local barter systems, and survival economies emerge overnight. The rich no longer dominate simply because they have money. Physical capacity and ingenuity define status. Society fragments into isolated clusters, some thriving, some failing, dictated purely by physical endurance and adaptive intelligence. Civilization splinters under the relentless force of gravity. Media and communication systems, the veins of modern information, are also disrupted. Satellites, heavier under doubled gravity, risk malfunction. Ground infrastructure struggles under its own weight. News spreads slowly, if at all. Governments cannot issue emergency alerts effectively. Social cohesion frays as misinformation fills the gaps, but even propaganda is limited by physical constraints. Human connection, the lifeline of trust and authority, is severely restricted. The population, isolated and exhausted, begins to redefine concepts of loyalty, leadership, and cooperation in radical new ways. Even entertainment, culture, and sports are transformed. Traditional games are impossible. Film sets, theaters, and concert halls collapse or become dangerous. The very idea of leisure is replaced by survival tasks. Society is stripped to its core: eat, move, breathe, and survive. Creativity survives only where humans find novel ways to cope with crushing reality. Art becomes a form of engineering, performance becomes functional movement. Humanity is no longer a species of comfort and convenience, it is a species of adaptation, ingenuity, and raw resilience. The final frontier of a doubled gravity Earth is evolution itself. Survival is no longer just daily endurance. It's a test of humanity's ability to adapt over generations. Those who endure today may survive tomorrow, but only if evolution accelerates in ways we can barely imagine. Muscles become denser, bones thicker, hearts stronger. Humanity faces a brutal selective pressure: the weak perish, the resilient thrive, and life is redefined by who can move, lift, and breathe under this unforgiving weight. Nature, indifferent as always, accelerates the process. The humans of tomorrow are no longer the humans of yesterday, they are creatures forged by extreme physics. Cities, if they survive at all, are rebuilt radically. Skyscrapers shrink, roads narrow, and infrastructure is designed for minimal movement. Exoskeletons and mechanical aids become extensions of the body, not luxuries. Transportation shifts to sliding, pulley-based, or conveyor-assisted systems. Agriculture is radically re-engineered: shorter, sturdier plants, animals selectively bred for strength, soil reinforcement to handle extra weight. Humanity, once arrogant in its control over nature, is now forced to submit and innovate simultaneously. Civilization is transformed, but survival is possible, if ingenuity matches the burden. Social systems mutate beyond recognition. Governance is no longer political theater, it is survival coordination. Communities organize by physical capability, innovation, and resilience. Leaders are chosen for their ability to endure and inspire adaptation, not for charisma or wealth. Traditional hierarchies collapse, survival metrics replace currency, status, and influence. Communities that innovate, share knowledge, and engineer collective survival thrive. Those that cling to old ways fail. Humanity becomes intensely pragmatic, stripped of non-essential luxury, focused on the mechanics of survival and cooperation under relentless pressure. Religion and ideology, once pillars of comfort, evolve, or fade. Faith becomes action-oriented, rituals are practical, guiding humans through movement, endurance, and collective survival. Spirituality transforms, merging with science and engineering, as devotion is measured in physical and intellectual resilience. Philosophical concepts of morality, justice, and purpose shift, ethics are grounded in what allows communities to persist rather than abstract ideals. The strongest survive, but the wisest innovate. Humanity is forced to reconcile spirit and body in ways unimaginable before. Long-term, evolution and technology intertwine. Exoskeletons, artificial muscles, and biomechanical augmentation become commonplace. Humans may integrate with machines to cope with gravity, merging biology and engineering in radical ways. The line between natural adaptation and artificial enhancement blurs. Those who fail to evolve, physically or technologically, risk extinction. Humanity is no longer purely biological, it becomes a hybrid of mind, body, and machine, shaped entirely by the planet's newfound tyranny. The future of life on Earth is no longer gentle, it is extreme, disciplined, and relentlessly efficient. Yet, amid the brutality, there is hope. Communities bond over shared struggle. Ingenuity accelerates, solutions emerge that no lighter gravity world could inspire. The human spirit, compressed and pressured, shines brighter under adversity. Art, science, and innovation survive because survival itself demands them. Humanity evolves not just to endure, but to thrive, under a planet that has become a test of willpower, resilience, and adaptation. Double gravity does not destroy completely, it transforms everything, leaving only the fittest, cleverest, and most determined standing. So, what do you think? Could humanity survive such a world? Would we evolve into something unrecognizable, or collapse under the weight of our own planet? Share your thoughts in the comments, and suggest what extreme, what-if, scenario we should explore next. The wilder, the more unimaginable, the better, because science doesn't have to be gentle, and curiosity is the ultimate survival tool.